I kind of position myself, along with a few other colleagues who work on China-Middle East relations in the contemporary kind of era, as part of a revisionist camp. Because ultimately, if you look at much of the scholarship that's produced, it tends to very much subscribe to the great power narrative that I had mentioned earlier. And I think my primary critique to that is that on the one hand, it tends to ignore what Chinese official and semi-official sources say about China's relationship with the Middle East, which oftentimes just really openly declares the region as a third or fourth tier area of strategic importance for China. To draw from a very good friend of mine, 𝗕𝗫𝗫𝗍𝒫, brilliant scholar on Chinese security and overseas deployments, the Middle East is the most important region among the unimportant regions to China. That's one way of putting it, right? And you can see that really come out in a lot of the textual sources, and if people are interested as to why, despite this big economic presence, I'd be more than happy to kind of unpack it a bit. The other part, or the other problem as to why this great power prism is distortive, is that it tends to ignore how local dynamics drive and co-opt the Chinese presence for their own goals, right? I mean, there's a lot of examples for that, but the Belt and Road Initiative is a really, really good example. So oftentimes, when you look at the way the Belt and Road Initiative is depicted and discussed in the media, you see these slick maps with Beijing at the center and all these dots around the Eurasian continent that are tied together by maritime and overland routes. In the Arabian Peninsula, if you scrutinize it, there are three major dots. One, I wish I put a map actually. One is in Kuwait, which is to the northwest, Silk City. One is in Oman, Duqm, which is a port city to the southeast of the Arabian Peninsula. And then another port called, or another center called the Jizan Economic City, which is to the southwest of Arabia, right? And these are depicted as essentially chess pieces in China's geopolitical binding of the Arabian Peninsula into its ambitious economic plans. However, if you do proper local case study work and field work, which is always lacking in this type of geopolitical analysis, you'll immediately come to recognize that almost all of these are projects that predate the Belt and Road Initiative. Some of them actually go back 30 years ago, where different governments are doing industrial projects, ports, and while the Belt and Road Initiative came up, they repackaged it in order, from the perception of officials, to court Chinese investments, right? So is this really China's geopolitical imposition on the Middle East, or is it local actors pursuing their own goals, right? So I think when you begin to take these two elements seriously in the geopolitical analysis, what the Chinese are saying, what the local actors are doing and saying, you actually begin to approximate the realities of understanding China's presence in the region, right? A very, very good example is actually Syria, very relevant right now. I wrote an article with 𝗕𝗫𝗫𝗫𝗍𝒫 looking specifically at Sino-Syrian relations. And if you look at the media discussions about it before Assad's fall for the last 14 years, there was this constant trope that was recurring and emerging, which was China was going to come in and reconstruct Syria. It was in very close alignment with Russia and wanted to kind of capture the Syrian market and achieve certain political and military ends there. But actually, when you looked at the Chinese discourse, when you looked at the local discourse, and you actually looked at the data, China's Syria relationship is perhaps the most humble and modest among all those in the region. And there has been no Chinese money that has materialized in Syria for very rational reasons. But that shows how big the gap is between kind of the perceptions and imaginaries and the actual realities that are far more modest on the ground.